Hey everybody. One thing that I think it's kind of overlooked when you're talking about the World of Greyhawk is the question of slavery. And that is what we're going to talk about today on Greyhawk Ragnar. So, this is probably going to be a sketchy topic for some people, but you know it's a fantasy game, so just keep that firmly in mind. It's just a game, and in the World of Greyhawk, we know that slavery exists, and we would expect to see it in places like Ayuz or the Horn Society or the Bandit Kingdoms or someplace like that, because they're inherently evil nations that either worship or are ruled by evil gods. You expect to see slaves in the lands of Ayuz and things like that. We also know for a fact that there is large-scale slavery in the Sea Princes down in the the southwestern corner of the Flanaess. And in fact, the implication is that they are down there. They have these large plantation-style slave economies. I don't think it's ever explicitly stated, although it might be in some of the later stuff, but that's always the impression I got, that slavery there was different than I own a couple of slaves here or there, that it was just you had these vast hordes of slaves to work your farming, your farms, in your plantations. Now, we also know that there is slavery in places like the Great Kingdom, Medegia, North Province, South Province. We know this because in the encounter tables in the glossography, those are one of the few places that actually have slavers as a random encounter. And they're a patrol. They're like a regular soldiery patrol, except they have slave wagons and 10 to 100 slaves in each one. And the way that they're called a patrol kind of implies that it's almost like a slave catching patrol. That they're looking for escaped slaves in the Great Kingdom, and you also see this in the Sea Princes too. So the implication is definitely that there is a pretty large scale slave economy in the Great Kingdom, which again is to be expected because the Great Kingdom is very much one of those evil countries, although it wasn't always. It's kind of slid slowly into it as a way of showing its degeneracy over the years. And of course we have the House of Nalax has taken on, and they are they worship demons and things like that. So you would expect to see it, but the Great Kingdom is also in some ways still a model of chivalry in some ways. So it is a little bit anomalous, but we do see slave patrols there, and in my mind that means they're hunting escaped slaves. And of course, the one thing we really have to touch on, of course, is the slavers, which was the focus of a number of very popular modules, A1 through A4, and was also featured in the module Slavers, which takes place much later as kind of a sequel, and that has kind of a different plot. And one of the interesting things about the original Slavers modules, and I'll touch more on this when I do a retrospective of them specifically, but just in the context of this video, is that there wasn't kind of an overarching plot behind the slave trade, right? I mean, you had the slavers in their yellow sailed ships, and they would be raiding all around the wild coast and so forth. But and then they would sell the slaves in slave markets in the Pomarge. But you never really got an idea that they were interested in anything more than just making a lot of money from selling slaves. Whereas in the module Slavers, which do I have? I don't have handy. There's actually this other plot of the cult of the Earth Dragon is putting together a slave army to serve the cult specifically, and Turash Mak is buying up a lot of slaves for his own purposes. So there's more of a meta plot going on in Slavers than there is in the original A1 through A4, which was collected together in Against the Slave Lords, I think it's called. where it really seems like they just want to get rich capturing and selling slaves, and the slave markets happen to be in the Palm Arge. But it is a very interesting thing to ask yourself, where do those slaves go? Where do they end up? I'm just talking off the top of my head. I don't remember if there's slavery in the city of Greyhawk itself, although I want to say yes, at least on a small scale. Same with divers, that there is slavery in the free cities. And certainly in the Wild Coast, you're going to see it. So those would be natural places to sell slaves. But you also could see merchants from the Great Kingdom coming over and buying slaves for the market back home. And of course, you could see landowners from the sea princes coming in to get more slaves for their plantations. So following the trail of where the slaves are being sold could be a very interesting way to kind of tweak the slavers modules, the original slavers modules, if you wanted to kind of expand it out into a broader kind of campaign. So that's the general gist of it. Is that yes, slavery exists in Greyhawk. It does not exist in the major good kingdoms like Furiondi or Valuna or Kaoland or places like that. There really aren't any mentions of it. But the kind of slavery that we see isn't necessarily the kind of slavery that you think of off the top of your head when you hear the term used today, because except for the plantations and the Sea Princes, it's more of another lower class type of person. And at least in some areas, like in the northwestern and Thelronian Peninsula, one could envision slaves being able to buy their own freedom after a while. And if we posit that the slavery that we see in places like Greyhawk or Divers or even parts of the Great Kingdom is more like the Roman version of slavery, where there was a large slave class, but there was also a large freeman class, which is basically, freeman is the word for a freed slave, and usually that happened because the slaves bought their own freedom in the Roman model, if we posit that is more the model that's being followed, then we could expect to see a lot of freedmen in Greyhawk as well. And I kind of like that idea, that yes, slavery exists, but unless you're in one of the really dark, oppressive places like Ayus or the Sea Princes or the Horn Society or something like that, there is still a way out if you're lucky enough to be in that circumstance. So luck, of course, being a relative term when we're talking about slavery. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the topic here. Remember, it's just talking about a fantasy game. This is not supposed to be an in-depth discussion about real-world slavery, or obviously it's an awful thing and nobody should be, nobody's in favor of it. But anyway, I hope this was an interesting, hopefully thought-provoking video for you. Let me know in the comments, how might you work slavery into your games? You could easily envision games that are designed around freeing slaves. There was a series of fantasy novels, I believe, in the 80s around that theme, where people were taken from I think Guardians of the Flame, maybe it's called, where gamers were brought into a fantasy world, and at the end of the first novel, they decided that their quest for the rest of their lives was going to be to destroy slavery in the world. I could see something like that here. You could see crusades from the good countries to free the slaves of the evil countries. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways you could work this into it, that could really be exciting. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, visit the Patreon, visit the blog, buy something off the web store, and I will talk to you later.